Okay, great. Welcome everyone for today's the third review for Bhagavad Gita, and then we have Sashi to start it. Okay, Sashi, please start. Yeah.
Mm, Here. Okay, so what we have done so far, slideshow mode. Okay, so speaking of Bhagavad Gita and Hindu philosophy, right? I want to go back to the basic tenet of the overall philosophy can be captured in the highest level of philosophy that Hinduism wants to talk about is Tattvamasi, right? What that means is that you are. Now, that is that unknown God, right? So today's discussion is all about God, okay? So the God here might come across as Hindu God, but it has nothing to do with Hindu God. It is more of a um, prayerful state of mind, and we'll talk about that, right? It has nothing to do with what or which deity it is. Um, so that you are means I ego, you aren't, right? So we talked in a couple lectures ago or presentations ago, this notion of us having multiple selves, right? You know, I ego, we'll talk more about that today. Um, and all right, so there are 18 chapters, right? So the first 6 chapters were about how our day-to-day actions can become a self-inquiry, right? We tend to do something out of like and dislike versus can we do that action on the basis of like, where am I operating from? You know, I ego or just the notion that everybody is in the image of God in a way, right? So that's another way to look at it, you know, if you believe in God. So the next 6 chapters, which is what this review is based on, is that, meaning the first 6 chapters wants to explore the human condition. The next is this whole thing that, you know, we can't answer many things, you know, what happens to us after death, or why are we here? And there's so many unknowns, despite the fact that science is uncovering all kinds of things. You know, why do I feel happy? Why do I feel sad? What is this consciousness? What do animals feel? You know, like there's so many things, right? So that is what is being inquired sort of in this section, right? 7 to 12. And it's more about the unknown. How can we perceive the unknown again from self-inquiry point of view? And how can that help us get our actions or day-to-day activities a little more conscious, if you will? And then the next 6 chapters, which we are at chapter number 17, is all about that ultimate wisdom that is the only wisdom that Gita wants us to consider. Everything else that we think is wisdom, be it physics and all of that stuff, it's a really interesting statement that they make here, which is that in chapter 7, actually, is that whatever you learn in this world about outward things will be considered as almost half-baked or corrupt if you do not have that position of self-inquiry. You know, and we can see that, right? You know, all the solutions that humanity has developed has caused tenfold problems, if you will, that go along with it. So this clarity of consciousness, you know, we spoke about that in the context of Jiddu Krishnamurti. You know, what he says is our consciousness basically is filled with all kinds of, be it anger, fear, jealousy, all kinds of issues because we maybe like certain person, a certain thing, or we dislike, and that pretty much controls what we end up doing. So it is the other who is controlling our actions. So it is in the metaphor of chariot that we spoke earlier. There's the horses, which are the senses. The reins are the mind, is the mind. And then there's the charioteer, and then there's the traveler. So who is in control of the whole chariot, right? Is it the charioteer or is it the horses? The fact that this other people, other things make us feel like or dislike means that we are just running haywire, basically, right? And that's different people talk about that in different ways. So if this is me, right? How I behave with my dad or my daughter or let's say Jason or my friend, my neighbor is all different, right? We tend to be situated in many selves. And we tend to call that as our ego in a way, right? We think that there's only one. No, we have many selves. We have a different persona, different face that we put based on the situation. And the goal is how to be in meditation. Meditation has different connotations. We have spoken about this many, many times. Meditation really means that how can I turn off all these different selves and have a certain clarity in whatever I'm doing, not so much from ethics point of view as civilization wants us to consider. And that is valid too, in the sense that the society has to stay peaceful, right? So it is a societal perspective on what is good and bad, but that's not what meditation and clarity is. Clarity is that you take action without any personal judgment of like or dislike, right? That's what samurai is prescribed to do when they go out killing people, right? In the war and all that stuff. So there is this notion of doing and being. We'll talk more about that. And we today seem to be more about doing, every second, every moment, we are really dependent on the other to tell us what is the life that we want to live. So what we spoke in the first 6 chapters was about karma. Karma means the action. Now, how can I use this action to reduce this chaos of ego, right? And that meant that, let's say I am working as a father or an engineer or a friend or a neighbor or whatnot, right? In that, every respect, right? I want to kind of wipe out my ego. The need for humility is stressed upon this, right? That is the karma yoga. And that is the first 6 chapters that we talked about. So here, and I think for all of us, I think Gita should just stop there, right? I mean, the further you go deeper from chapter 7 onwards to 18, it's really very intense and difficult, and we will talk about that. While reading, everything seems normal, right? We understand everything, and that's sort of the difficulty, actually. The fact that we understand, we think that we know, but that's not it, right? We can understand, yet we do not know what that is. So the first 6 chapters are actually enough for us to, on our own, continue the journey. Many times these written texts can be very misleading, in the sense that not they are misleading, we are misleading ourselves just by thinking that we can read it and we are done. We put that book on the shelf and we're like, hey, look, I read that, I'm done. And we continue our ways out in the society the way we have been living completely, right? So that was the first 6 chapters, which is, how can I control my ego? The next one, say 6 chapters that we are going to talk about is, okay, so you've started doing that. But now how can I take all of these actions, all of these different selves that I have, and I can bring on this element of God, where I say, I am not doing it, but I'm doing it for God. Okay. And we'll try to understand this concept of God, right? Be it Christian God, be it Islamic God, be it Hindu God, doesn't matter. So here in this 6 chapters, it is going to be more about concentration, which is being one, not so many selves, right? And that's what bhakti also means. Vibhakti is the word that means that separation. Bhakti, on the other hand, is unification of one's being, right? And here it is all about thy will be done. You don't particularly have your will in it, but any action that comes to your need for you to do work on it, you say that that is being done for God, right? And we will talk more about that. And then the next six chapters is all about Gyan, or the wisdom. And here you are actually, it sometimes people might want to jump to this Jnana, which is what happens with Vedanta, or that phrase Tattvamasi, where you are that. Basically, sometimes people, I myself am sort of like that, in the sense that I don't particularly believe in God, right? But there are many people like us. I'm not atheist, but I have a different notion of God. And Vedanta actually underlines that, says that, there's no such thing as um, separate God. And Gita eventually does talk about that. In chapter 15, we covered that, right? The I that is presented in Gita throughout is really yourself. And initially it comes across as Krishna, but he's really talking about you. And why jumping directly on that bandwagon, if you will, is actually kind of disastrous. So you have to kind of go from doing to karma to bhakti and then come to jnana, right? So we talked about crisis, conditioning, dilemmas, right? That is what triggers. Otherwise, we are living this life perfectly happily. I mean, we all are happily attending this session. We go about our ways. There's really, a little bit of sorrows here and there, and we kind of like float along, right? Until an existential crisis hits us. And then you question any role that you were playing for a long time, be it like a father, be it a husband, be it a wife, you start questioning, right? That is that crisis that Arjuna went through, where he said, like, why am I fighting my brothers? Might as well become a monk. And that's when all of this, the next review that we talked about, where Krishna is explaining to him action, duty, and humility. And there's a lot of resistance initially from Arjuna to Krishna. Like, he's questioning all of that. Um, but by the time he comes to chapter 7, um, he's willing, right? He's willing to understand what Krishna is trying to say. And if you look at that journey of Arjuna, that journey is something that we all have to go through. And it's not just about understanding these words the way they have been phrased here, or Gita the way it has been phrased there. It's kind of pointless if we leave it there. Every crisis that we come across, hopefully it is strong enough where we kind of actually understand what Buddha says as his first tenet, right? That life is suffering. Now, we sort of agree with Buddha, but we really don't understand life as suffering. We actually like this life, especially living in America. Yeah, we might complain about little things here and there, and we complain about health, and we might as well live longer. But we don't understand the overall nature of suffering. We have sufferings which are very much geared towards our own personal growth, maybe, or maybe we lose a house or something like that. But we don't understand the actual uh, the enlightened understanding that Buddha is trying to tell us, which is life is suffering, and here are the prescriptions, what you need to do, right? We can't go to the second tenet until you satisfy the first one, which is, do we really understand that life is suffering? If not, then it's pointless. All the other stuff, you might read it and everything will be good. The one book that I found was very readable and very useful was The No Self-Help book by Kate Gustin. And I use some of the phraseology in this. I only came across this like a month ago. Um, she tends to call self is all these selves that we have, and no self is not ego, right? And so I like the way she presented it. And I have used some of those phrases here, but more of it is the Gita phrases, right? So these next 7 things that we are going to talk about is, okay, fine, you have come to this understanding of actionless action. and you have been practicing that, right? How can you make that permanent in your life, right? What is going to help you make that karma yoga stick? And that devotion can help there, right? So jumping into just a couple phrases from chapter 6, Krishna says that the yogi is greater than the doers of ascesis, meaning penance, people who stand on one leg or they go to the mountains and, like go through all kinds of trouble. Greater than doers of ascesis, greater than men of knowledge, greater than the men of works. Become then the yogin, right? So he says that it's fine if you do penance and if you're doing exercises and you're trying to sit calm and quiet and close your eyes, all of that is good. But the knowledge is important, right? Knowledge meaning this understanding within you that, look, that liking and disliking that is pulling me out into the world, or this fact that I'm closing my eyes and shunning the world, that is not the way. There is a deeper knowledge that, like I am something more who can observe my anger or my need to get away from this, right? And then the work actions itself. So here again in this phrase, right, he is bringing him back, Arjuna, to, like Arjuna says, I will just go to the mountains and be a monk. He says, no, 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 no. You stay here in the world and do your works, do your action, do your duty, whatever is required of you to do, and you can become a yogi at the same time. And the whole definition of yogi, caste system, sannyasi, all of that stuff, right? Renunciation is beautiful in Gita, like, but it is completely lost in the over the generations, right? Of all yogins or yogis, he who with all his inner self given up to me, for me has love and faith, him I hold to be the most united with me in yoga, right? Yoga we understand as an exercise, a way to breathe and all that stuff.
As an expert in this field, I just don't think that's true personally.
Oh, okay, go ahead. You want to elaborate that, or?
Let's continue. Okay. Never mind, just continue.
Okay. All right. Okay, so yoga actually means that oneness with, be it universe, be it God, be it whatever, right? Basically being one, right? So there are two paths that come across here. One is, knowledge, and then the other is, he says, work, right? Actions. So karma yoga, we talked about this earlier. Yagya is the offering, sacrifice one has to do as you are working towards this, the action that you are keeping it as a serving of the society, let's say. In that, sometimes you're going to feel hurt, right? And that is that offering. And then ultimately you come to the state of dhyana or meditation, right? And it's an ongoing meditation, constant all the time, right? So it's not sitting quietly for 15 minutes or half an hour, 1 hour, whatever, with the music on quietly in a room. That's certainly good. But in every action, how can we be in this state, right? And then, Arjuna is worried that, oh, like if I fight the war, people are going to become widows, like women are going to become widows and there'll be orphans and all that stuff, right? So there'll be a breakdown of the human society. And Krishna basically corrects him in chapter 3 that, look, that's not the breakdown of the system. What will be the breakdown of system is if you don't follow your duty or what you have been brought to this planet to do, people are going to follow that example wrongly, and that will cause a long-term damage to the society, right? So throughout, there's a lot of confusion Arjuna presents, and then there is this give up to me, with love and faith. So we will talk about that here more. One of the problems with just the first 6 chapters, the Karma Yoga, tends to be that, you, despite all the humility, by the way, I think Christianity does a lot of this, right? One of the best religions, I guess, who have devised their whole religion around serving the community, right? And now the humility itself can sometimes cause a subtle ego. So that is where these next 7 chapters are leading us into, like how we can control that. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about God, right? So Krishna wants to say that he's God throughout this Gita. And then there are all these other people, right? Christ, Buddha, and then there are all these saints, Kabir, Mira, these are the so-called bhakti path-related saints from India who are known for using devotion to reach that highest enlightenment. And they're guides, right? Sometimes we wonder, like, why, when they were there, if they were there, how come the society never changed? We still see a lot of problems, but I think they're there, and as you can see, society cannot change. Ultimately, it is up to the individual to ask this question as we come across Gita or any of these teachings, be it Bible, right? Can I share their bliss, right? Whatever that happy state that they have, can I possibly reach that? It is about a I conversation, right? Not about them or the other or
Jason touches kids.
Jason, do you want to control the audience? Maybe. I don't know who it is. There's a lot of new people, I think. If people want to say something, can you raise your hand?
Yeah, please raise your hand and
Have a proper discussion, right?
yeah.
Unless
Okay,
you just
so
want to.
go ahead, Sashi. I'm going to take care of. Right now, I'm not going to let people in.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is another thing that has happened to our society, right? Where right, welcome to social media and crowd-based things, right? And one of the things with God, what we end up doing is we tend to do 2 things, right? We either crucify them or we put them on pedestal. And that is really what we are trying to do is, let me live my life. And we'll do the puja or the, 1 hour of ceremony in the morning or whatever, like 15 minutes, or go on a Sunday mass and all that stuff. And then we are back to normal, right? And it's almost like, when that person is alive, we cannot really appreciate. And this is another interesting thing that happens between Arjuna and Krishna, who are actually friends, right? They're buddies. And they happen to also be cousins too, right? Can you imagine if your cousin told you, hey, like, I'm God and you got to believe me? I mean, would you believe them? Probably not, right? And for most of us, it becomes easier for us to see a dead person from the past, an imaginary person, as a god, right? And part of it is that there is no debating that can happen there, right? It's much like why we have gravitated as a society towards a lot of pets, right? It's so hard and difficult to interact with human beings because they can challenge you. Pets do not challenge you. So you see this ease of being with something that does not challenge your belief system or whatever, right? And in fact, I think our condition, wherever we are right now, is like this because we indeed have succeeded in this, right? To just ignore and stay in whatever mechanism that we have decided to live. And that is not a reflection on any of these people or any of the things that they were saying. In fact, the religions that followed after these people is, again, I don't believe them to be a reflection on these people at all. So it is up to the receiver of the text. Part of it is we just don't want to take any efforts, right? Change is hard. We just want to ease in and keep floating along. And these real humans, they when they were alive, if they were alive, right? One of the reasons why we don't want to attribute this notion of godhood to them is because they are much like us, another human being. So you kind of question that. So I came across this really interesting article online about this rabbi. So he says something really interesting. He's not worried about living up to Moses or Abraham, right? Rather, his concern was that upon his death, God would ask him, Zusha, why weren't you Zusha, right? So ultimately, it is our question. That is what Krishna is trying to tell Arjuna is, Arjuna, be Arjuna. Understand who Arjuna is. And that is a call for all of us, actually, right? So that is why sometimes these books can do a disservice to us in the sense that they tell us, oh, Krishna was great, and then Arjuna became great, and that's the end of the story. No, it's about us, right? And that kind of gets lost. So I think today will be a very delayed thing, but I'm not sure how much I'm going to be able to cover. So in chapter 7, he kind of breaks things apart into what is the actual wisdom. And so he calls it jnana and vijnana, right? What is the wisdom? One is situated in the no self, the center of that circle, if you remember. And then seeing the no self within every being, thing, etc. out there, right? And then operating in the world, right? That is what is prescribed in chapter 7. Okay, so I think last time we were reading this, but unfortunately I'm going to skip today. So, the neat thing of this summary series that we are doing is I can see a thread between chapter 16 that we covered. Jason, I think you were attending that and some other folks were attending that. In chapter 16, we kind of talked about the sort of the divine qualities, if you will, and then the demonic qualities, right? Like what kind of things that we do help us build this so-called inner wealth. And then there is the outer wealth, right? Houses and property and money and all that stuff, right? So chapter 16 kind of covers that, like, hey, whatever you're doing on this planet, try to see how it can build your inner wealth, right? And then chapter 17 is going to talk about more about faith, even though it is put in the context of jnana or the knowledge. So there he kind of talks about there is these 4 kinds of devotions, right? And he kind of touches upon that over here as well. So one is, we tend to pray to God because you want to free yourself from suffering. You want to do something good in the world. And, he also says in 7.24 that, hey, a lot of people around us, he tells Arjuna that they don't really think of me as anything more than just a simple human, right? And then the third kind of devotion, if you will, is about like this ultimate knowledge that we want to get about oneself, right? So even in this, though, right, what can happen is you might understand it from the word's perspective. The ego-fulfilling I might still remain in subtle ways until you go through this chapter 7 through 13 in a way, right? That's what he's trying to say here. And the fourth type of devotion, which he calls is the best, is adore me with knowledge, right? So here me has a variety of meanings, right? Eventually in chapter 15, you will get the revelation, what me is he talking about. But, people might think he's talking about Krishna, but Krishna is speaking from that no self position, right? Deeper position. And we all have that, except we have layers of selves that are sitting on top of that, and we really cannot hear the inner voice. And the easiest way to phrase this would be to consider this external God and then you say, thy will be done, right, in a way. And that's really, he says that is going to help you a lot. So faith and belief, right? This is an interesting thing to kind of talk about. Like, hopefully you guys go back and read this stuff if you have time. But we will cover more next year as well. But belief tends to be more like, hey, look, I kind of don't particularly know this for sure, but I'm going to believe this out of fear, right? And most of the time it is like, oh, you know what? I don't know what this is, but everybody is doing it, so I'm going to do it, right? Faith, on the other hand, is a little bit different. Like I try to kind of draw an analogy there with somebody who has gone through 12th grade and he's done with his high school, and he or she and they are now trying to pick a school, right? When they're picking a school, let's say they pick a medical school or neurosurgery or be a computer scientist or whatnot, right? At When they are choosing that school, they really do not know the whole story. They don't even know what that field is going to end up looking like in 10 years or 15 years or whatever, however long they have to do the education and then be stable in their career. But they jump into that after the 12th grade with a certain amount of faith, meaning a positive expectation that they're going to learn. This notion of one developing a studentship, if you will, right? It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I see a lot of kids who go to these public universities, for example, right? Like UC Berkeley or wherever. The classes are filled with like 500 to 700 kids, right? Sometimes. And there is no one-on-one that you get with the teacher. It is left up to the student to really understand what's going in the class. The teaching assistants go and help them understand things, and then they go back and they learn on themselves, right? So the stress is on the student. It's not so much about who is the teacher. So that is what is getting cultivated here in these chapters through chapter 1 till 7, 8, 9, right? As you see, Arjuna is becoming more of a receptor. He's receiving the advice a little more cleanly. All those doubts have been clarified for him. And this developing the faith, one example they give in various different um, Vedic Vedanta books, right? That they say, like, if you are in a very dry, arid desert or whatever, right? And it is very hot, but you can smell the perfume of oasis, for example, right? Humidity somewhere, because you're so thirsty for it, for water. And you know that you're going in the right direction. So that is the notion, so kind of faith will give you that positive understanding, and then you kind of put your next step forward, right? And you are in that right direction of building that inner wealth, if you will. But that is a personal journey. Nobody is going to give you any certification on this, right? But a lot of our belief systems or our regular religious practices and stuff like that, rituals and all of that, is more of a show off, right? For a society that, look, I've done this, I'm attending the mass and I'm doing these rituals, and you invite a lot of people. It's more of a societal show off. So it's others' validation. It's never about my own journey. What does it mean when I read this mantra from Sanskrit or whatever, right? Like some book. How does it impact my own life? I'm listening to this beautiful song from Meera or, Kabir or whoever. Well, great. You appreciate the song, you appreciate the poetry, but what does it mean for me, right? That next step is always required to be taken. So ultimately, faith comes down to this word called as a bhava. Bhav is something almost kind of like, you can't really explain this feeling of love, for example, right? Where love involves two people, there is a certain level of attachment. And this feeling, the faith, I can akin it to that sort of a thing, right? Where you sort of have this intuition that this is going in the right direction, and you kind of take the next step, and then you keep going, you take the next step. More of an inner journey and inner pursuit, if you will, right? And yeah, like the highest example of faith, and we have talked about this story where Arjuna is given, Arjuna and Duryodhana, the opposite bad prince, if you will, they both come to Krishna for help. And Arjuna chooses Krishna over the thousands of soldiers that Krishna's army has, right? And that is a great example of what faith means, right? What is one person? And Krishna already tells him, like, look, I'm not going to pick up any sword or any armament in this whole war. Now you have a choice. Who do you pick? Do you pick my soldiers with the arms and all that stuff, or do you pick me, right? Arjuna picks Krishna. And Duryodhana picks the whole army, right? And I think that is also a reflection of the internal fear, right? We don't have a way to it's not so much like a blind faith, but you have a general understanding. And the way you come to that is higher the inner wealth, higher, better will be your capability for judgment, right? He covers that in chapter 16. So if you look at why Arjuna comes across as a good person throughout the whole Mahabharata versus Duryodhana, you will see how the inner wealth has been developed in Arjuna despite all the uh, atrocities that family goes through because of Duryodhana. And that whole thing kind of helps you understand. But here you are an external reader, right? But this is something that we can also see within ourselves. If we were given a choice to make a judgment call that, like, hey, look, you will have to sacrifice this versus if you do this other thing, you don't have to sacrifice anything, and you probably will make more money by doing that, the other path. What do we choose? And most of the time, I think 99% of us is choosing the other path, right? You look at all the corporate greed and basically all of that kind of mentality has trickled down in the society, all the way down to our kids, if you will, right? What schools teach us and how we perceive neighbors or others or politics or everything in a way. So in chapter 8, there is a focus on swabhava. Basically, when we talk about who am I, our immediate instinct is to talk about what activities we do. Because who am I is actually really nebulous, right? And we have no idea. Why am I conscious, and why am I even talking, and why am I like, what is this whole thing, right? So that nature of turning off this the dependency on activity or the societal roles or responsibility that have been imposed on us that is what you would think of that as the doing, right? But this being where you like shut yourself down, meditation, this calming yourself down for 1 hour, where you're sitting silently with no stimulus, right? That is your being. But can you be like that all the time, right? And that is also called here as the swabhava. Swa means self, and bhava is something that we talked about earlier. It's sort of like an inner tendency, intuition, if you will, feeling. And adhyatma means study of oneself. And that is, or spirituality, that is the common word that we tend to use, but now people have all kinds of meanings for that. But spirituality ultimately really means, who am I, right? That's the question that you're trying to answer. And ultimately, the observation is that, are you situated in that dot in the center of that circle, or are you situated on the outside, those different selves? So one of the things he says is that, everything that you do, you want to constantly make sure that you're remembering this, right? Remember that you in reality are a being, and so is this other person, and so is the tree, and so is the house, and so is the rock, and all of that stuff, right? Versus just the doing, where you are situated outside in the roles. So that's what comes across in chapter 8. Is this constant remembrance, right? Smarana is the word that he uses in Sanskrit over there. If thy mind and thy understanding are always fixed on and given up to me thou shalt surely come. So ultimately, the journey is from that outside of the wheel to the inner part of it, right? And in these 6 chapters, from 7 onwards, it's more about how can I bring all these selves, be it father, mother, father, brother, an engineer, and all of these different roles that I'm playing, different selves that I'm playing. Can I bring a bhakti in them, right? Or can I bring this oneness in them? And that fixation, right? Always fixed on or given up to something, which is me. He says you can use Krishna as the device or any other god. That is going to help you ease into this. So he also talks about a little bit of the yoga here with motionless mind, a soul armed